Welcome to Photo Editing Sessions. I'm Mauna Kea Archery. In this episode, I'm going to show you my workflow for astrophotography. So whenever I take astrophotos, I take multiple frames and combine them in a process called stacking. This process involves noise averaging, which greatly reduces the noise without compromising the quality. So this photo is Mauna Kea, the biggest mountain on the Big Island in Hawaii. So for this series of photos, I took 5 frames and I'm gonna have them open in Camera Raw. I'm gonna start off by removing the chromatic aberrations. So for this lens, I use the Rokinon 12mm f2.0 at f2, and there's going to be some chromatic aberrations at f2, so I should have done it at f2.8 to make it less chroma and less chromatic aberration. And I'm not going to bother with the other settings, the lens profile corrections, because that's not needed. Okay, I'm going to reduce the highlights a little bit, increase the shadows, and also increase the vibrance to bring out color in the sky and a bit of saturation. And I'm pretty happy with the white balance right now. And I'm going to move on to the adjustments brushes. So with this photo, I want a little bit more blue on the sky. So I like the color right here of the horizon, but I want some more color on the top, some more blue. So I'm going to adjust the tint and actually add a light blue in the color picker. And I'm just going to drag down and find a good place for that. Alright, I'm going to reduce the saturation of that a little bit. That's a little too much blue. And maybe adjust the temperature a little bit warmer. Alright, I like that. And also I'm going to increase the contrast a little bit for that. Okay, I'm going to move on to adjustment brushes. So you may not see it right now, but I'm going to fix all that red tint in the foreground. So this will help me later when I increase the shadows when I'm stacking the images. So to fix that reddish tint, I'm gonna drag the tint all the way to green, and I'm just gonna paint along the foreground. So I should carefully paint that along. Make sure I cover all those areas. I'm just going to adjust the tint a little bit more, or the temperature. And actually I forgot to take away that saturation or the color picker and reset the contrast. And it looks like there's a little bit of green coming onto the mountain. And I use the eraser tool to erase that off. Alright, I'm going to create a new brush and just get some of those edges where there's more red. So I'm using the bracket keys to adjust the size of the brush, just to let you know. And it's a little bit too green. Okay, I'm gonna create one last brush, and this one is just gonna be for that small part of the mountain. Okay, so that's about it for those, fixing that ugly tint. And then I'm going to reset the exposure. And now I'm gonna change increase the contrast of the Milky Way. So a little bit of the Milky Way is visible, but the main part of the Milky Way, the galactic center, wasn't visible during this time of year, so I only got a little bit of the Milky Way, and the North Star is right here. So to make the Milky Way more prominent, to increase the contrast, I'm gonna use the brush and make that more feathered and increase the clarity. Also, I'm going to increase the contrast. And I like that to be just a little bit warmer. Okay, I'm going to go back to the basic adjustments and just increase the whites a little bit more and reduce the highlights. Okay, next up I'm going to select all the images and synchronize all the settings. So select them all and click on the drop down menu and select everything. And now all the frames have the same settings. And there's a few more adjustments I'm going to make. So a car was passing by and it lit some of the foreground, so I still have to adjust that a little bit. So I'm going to erase the green tint on the fence. Also on this image I'm going to erase the whole brush. Actually not erase it, but I'm gonna just reset that a little bit and make the tint more magenta. Also I'm gonna add more blue. Actually reset the temperature and add more magenta. Also, I'm going to fix that temperature on the other brush, and also add a little bit more magenta. So for this photo, the car actually lit a little bit more of the mountain, so I'm going to increase the shadows a little bit so I can bring out some more detail. Okay, so all those frames are finished, and now I'm going to select all the images and open them, and that'll open them in Photoshop. Once I have all of them opened in Photoshop, I'm going to open them in new layers. So by going to File, Scripts, and going to Load Files into Stack. So this will load them all into a stack in a new file. So I'm going to add the open files and leave those unchecked and press OK. The next step is to so they're stacked right now, and the next step is to do the noise reduction. So noise averaging, basically you average the opacity of all the layers. So the base layer, the bottom layer, stays at 100%. The next layer goes to 50%. The next layer will be 33%. The next layer will be 25%, and the next layer will be 20%. And if there's actually an easier way to do this. So I'm just gonna reset those, the opacities of that. So the other way is to convert them into a smart object, and you only can use this method in Photoshop Creative Cloud or Photoshop CS6 Extended. So if you have those programs or those versions, this will be the easier method. So I'm going to have all the layers selected and convert to smart object. I'm going to go to Layer, Smart Objects, and then Stack Mode, and select Mean. So this is basically it's the same process, but Photoshop would do it for you. And I'm going to show you the difference between the noise reduction or the noise averaging. So this is actually just one layer, and that's really noisy. But as you add more layers, averaging the opacity, it reduces the noise by averaging the pattern. So as you put it on each layer, it'll be less noisy. But now we have the problem of the star trails. So we have the foreground noise average, and that's good, but now we have to fix the star trails. So to do that, I'm gonna name this to the foreground layer, and this will go to the bottom. And then these layers, I'm gonna keep them averaged, the opacity averaged, but I'm gonna go to Edit, Auto Align Layers, and automatically align them. Let Photoshop align the layers for you. So this won't do a perfect job. If you took a photograph of the galactic center, it'll probably align it correctly, but since the North Star was right there and the stars are going around in a rotation, then it has a hard time aligning them. So I'm going to show you how to manually align the photos. So I'm going to zoom in 100% and reveal the next layer. And to fix those unaligned stars, I'm going to go to Transform or Control T and go to the Warp Transform. And basically now I'm going to try to align the stars as best as I can. So I'm going to start at the corner and then just work my way around using the pan tool. Alright, so this layer is finished and all of it looks pretty good. I'm gonna finish that transform and it's gonna transform that for me. And I'm just gonna go through the next layers and keep aligning them. I finished all the warping now, and at one point I actually forgot to use the warp transform, so that pretty messed up. Just make sure you remember to do the warp transform. So as you can see, that's did a pretty good job of noise averaging. And some of the layers are off, but I can fix that later. Alright, so once I have all that finished, I'm going to go back to the foreground and bring that to the top. And I'm going to select the star layer or the star photos and combine them into one layer, and I'm just going to call them stars. So for the foreground, I want to remove the stars or the background. So I'm going to use the quick selection tool and select the mountain and use the refine edge tool to get a nice edge. So I'm going to enable smart radius and increase the radius to about 3 pixels and increase the smooth edge a little bit, and then I'm going to go to output to a layer mask and OK. And then now I'm going to actually move the layer using the arrow key, so I'm just going to press the up keys until I don't see any of that ghosting on the star layer. So I'm going to move that up until everything is clear. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to crop the layer to get rid of those transparent edges. Now I'm going to start doing some more noise reduction. So to do that, I'm going to rasterize that layer first. So it was a smart object, but now I rasterize it so that the filters don't get affected when I reduce the size of the image. So I'm just going to make a copy of both layers so I can go back if I need to, and I'm going to group those layers. And now I'm going to go to filter, noise, and dust and scratches. So I'm going to use this to get rid of all those little white dots around the image. This function does a really good job of that. So the radius is 1 pixel and the threshold is 15. And that got rid of a lot of those white dots. Okay, that's pretty much it for the noise reduction, and you might want to, or I might want to do more depending what I'm going to use this image for, if I'm going to print it or upload it online. But the next step I'm going to do is create a new layer, and I'm going to draw a circle. So I want to sharpen just the edges of the image because the lens was kind of soft on the edges, so I just want to soften the edges or sharpen the edges. So I'm going to use the circle selection and just make a circle, and I'm going to invert the selection by pressing Ctrl-Shift-I and filling that selection by pressing Alt and Delete, and that'll fill the selection with the foreground color. I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, and Gaussian Blur. So this is going to be my mask for the sharpening. So I'm going to have it around 700 pixels and press OK. I'm going to hide that layer and create a copy of the foreground or the star layer. And I'm going to use the unsharpened mask to sharpen the stars. So my radius is going to be around 2 with a threshold of 0, and the amount is going to be 150. So this will really sharpen up some of those stars on the edges. Maybe I should increase the threshold, maybe 2. Okay, now I'm gonna press Control and select the circle that I made and use a layer mask to mask that. And now the center won't be sharpened, but the edges are sharpened now. I'm gonna select both of those star layers and press Control-E to combine them. And now I'm gonna do a global sharpening of the whole star layer. So this time I'm just gonna do a amount of 100 and press OK. So now the whole thing is pretty sharp. And also I'm gonna reduce some of those stars, ugly stars that had chromatic aberrations, but it just created a black dot. So I'm just gonna use the spot healing brush or the healing brush tool and clone out some of those stars. Okay. And the next step, I'm noticing that the foreground is a little bit too noisy for my taste, so I'm gonna use a noise reduction plugin called Noise Aware. So this plugin does a pretty good job of reducing the noise. So there's various presets. I'm gonna use the night scene preset, but that's doing it way too much, so I'm gonna reduce the amount of noise reduction there is. Also, I'm gonna increase the high frequency noise reduction and also a little bit the medium frequency. Okay, now I'm gonna do some reduce the size. So I'm just gonna show you how what I would reduce the size to for uploading online. So 1280 by 853, so 1280 on the long side. And the next step, I'm gonna sharpen the stars even more. So I'm gonna use the unsharp mask, and I'm going to use a amount of 50 and the radius 0.5 and leave the threshold around 2, and this will really make the stars more like a pinpoint. So this will sharpen up a lot, make the stars look nicer. And then for the foreground, I'm going to use the Smart Sharpen tool, and the amount will be around 50 and radius 0.2 and noise reduction around 5. Actually I'm gonna combine those two layers, and now I'm gonna do the noise reduction or the smart sharpen. So these two layers are combined, so this is just one layer now, and I'm gonna keep the settings the same. Alright, so now this image is gonna look really sharp when I upload it to social media sites. Alright, so that's how I process my astrophotography. I take multiple frames so that I can stack them in Photoshop and use noise averaging to make the noise go away but still retain the quality. I do sharpening when it's full resolution, and I also do sharpening when it's low resolution. Thanks for watching my video. Subscribe and like for more of these videos.